Hi everyone, welcome to week 3. This week we'll be discussing heteronormativity and multiculturalism in early childhood education. So just to start off, I want to thank you for your thoughts in response to the week 2 provocation. Many of you are really delving into some rich questions about what social constructionist theory is and how it might live in moments with young children. So in many responses, I noticed that you focused your conversations on what listening might do to the collective rather than only on the individual. And this is something that I really want you to stay with this term in moving away from the individualist accounts of early childhood education, children's individual progress and development, and rather moving toward an orientation to practice that considers the collective and thinks about the kind of communities and democracies we want to create in early childhood education, and then also the necessary conditions for this particular kind of collective life. So I invite you to stay with some of those ideas in your future responses as well. So this week, I want to stay with this quote. We need to get beyond the appeal of happy surfaces. And I pulled this quote from the article we read this week by Sarah Ahmed. Happy surfaces are very much in abundance in early childhood education. In this course, try to delve beyond the common assumption of early childhood education as an innocent, happy, free, or neutral space, and consider happiness as a political question, as we've done in this week's reading. So this week, we'll be reading Sarah Ahmed's Multiculturalism and the Promise of Happiness, and we'll only be reading this one article as it's a heavy one. Not in terms of length, but I think some of the concepts are quite thick, and there's a lot to think with. So I hope that you can take the time, read slowly through this article, and grapple with its meaning. So try to make sense of what Ahmed is proposing by taking really thorough notes, writing in the margins, highlighting, looking up words, etc., and engaging in the online forums with any questions or ideas that you have. So by Saturday at 11:55 p.m., watch the video clip Bend It Like Beckham as she draws on this movie in her article. Read the micro blog by Africa Taylor called What Would Happen If the Home Corner, What Would Happen in Home Corner If It Transformed into a Refuge for Queer Kin, and then post a response in the provocation forum. And then by Sunday at 11:55, respond to one other weekly post. So to just get us started, let's consider what is heteronormativity. Heteronormativity is a normalized assumption that supposes that heterosexual relationships are natural and given. Heteronormativity is predicated within a gender binary. So that means the assumption that a person is born either male or female, and this is the basis of gender, as heteronormativity would assume. It also assumes that gender and sexual orientation are given within these fixed terms. And heteronormativity privileges cisgender, and by cisgender I mean when a person's gender is in line with their birth sex. And it also privileges heterosexual relationships as the norm. So there are many examples of how heteronormativity shows up in early childhood spaces. A few examples are children's movies and stories. These are significant in proposing heterosexual relationships as the norm, where heterosexual love is often the promise of the happy ending, as this week Sarah Ahmed discusses in her article. This is she shares that this is sort of a part of a moral economy where some scripts lead to endings that make everything good and happy again, whereas others do not. So gender binaries are particularly visible in the early years. So imagine your local toy store, the colors and images that divide girls' toys from boys. This is a really strong example. Also in children's clothing stores, birthday party supplies, common circle time practices where educators invite children to count all the girls and then all the boys as a form of attendance. And in following Africa Taylor's blog post this week, heteronormativity and gender roles are very much alive in the home corner. So, in Africa's blog this week, she challenges us as early childhood scholars to queer the home corner. She's working with queer theory here to trouble a common assumption about what we assume, about how we assume things have always been done in early childhood spaces. So she's offering a queer eye as a means of noticing, questioning, and responding to the discourses which uphold oppressive narratives and create spaces toward more possible storylines and symbols in early childhood education, which allow for multiple ways of knowing to become possible. And last week we discussed how listening might be involved in this. So Africa calls on us to, quote, reimagine the home corner anew beyond the standard design and play that reproduce heteronormative domestic relations. And this statement very much echoes some of the key concepts taken up by Sarah Ahmed in her article this week that problematize multiculturalism as a symbol of happy domestic Western life that actually masks racialized and gendered issues. And we'll go further into that in a moment. So the home corner is very much a symbol of this happy, white, heterosexual social construction of family life and humanity. The space and the objects within it propose particular ways of moving and relating with others. There's an atmosphere within the home corner that alludes to a certain way of life, an ideal image of happiness and how life ought to be lived. Ahmed describes how such spaces and objects are associated with particular ideas of happiness and normalcy and produce effects for those who encounter them. And we'll discuss more on her notion of happiness as a social construct later on in the next slide. But this is also an opportunity for you to think of listening, as we discussed last week, not only interpersonally with humans, but also listening to the discourses that are at play in the symbols of childhood and the physical objects in the space. So Taylor asks us, what would the architectures of home corner look like if designed to accommodate all manner of refugees, dispossessed, and displaced beings instead of nuclear families? What kind of recuperative queer kin rituals, practices, and relations would emerge in this purposefully reconfigured collective safe space? So I invite you to imagine what this disruptively queered home corner might look like and what it inspires you toward. So Ahmed discusses happiness this week from a critical post-feminist lens. So in this article, she's looking at the social construction of happiness as directly linked to loyalty to national ideals. For example, heterosexual marriage, traditional gender roles, the white middle class nuclear family, etc. So she problematizes the image of the happy multicultural state or happy diversity, that's very common here in Canada, as a program of thought that funnels ethnic and cultural diversity and difference into a common, seemingly neutral frame. So in order to fit within dominant images of the happy multicultural community, people must integrate themselves into a pre-existing Euro-Western imaginary. She writes, we could say that happiness is promised as a return for loyalty to the nation, where loyalty is expressed as giving diversity to the nation through playing its game. And she uses game as a metaphor throughout this article. So drawing on the film Bend It Like Beckham, Ahmed discusses how team sports, such as football, are often portrayed as an inclusive, neutral, level playing field where diversity becomes happy because it involves a loyalty to what has already been given as a national ideal.